Okay, hello everybody. John from the 365-day challenge here, and we're back with 3 more hands from yesterday's session. We had another good day yesterday, plus over 2,000, and it was actually over 3,000, but we put in a big time payment that's going to last a couple weeks. Just trying to make sure we don't have to do that every single day because it's annoying. But anyway, let's get into 3 hands here that we played yesterday. These ones, there's one that has some reads in there, but there's some other ones that are a little bit just more poker theory, which I think people might appreciate, not just hearing me give out my reads every single hand. This first one does have reads in it, though. And I will say yesterday we kind of sun ran. The first couple days I was saying, we're winning a lot of money, but we're mostly stealing pots from people. It hasn't really been a lot of like coolers or us running good. Today I think was running good. I didn't get lucky on anybody in a big pot, like where I spiked a card after we were all in or something, but I hit a lot of boards, and this first hand is going to be a really great example of what was happening a lot yesterday. So I have the 8-9 offsuit. We're on the button. The under the gun player raises to $20. Let me get back in the swing of how I'm doing this. So we get a raise to 20. We get a call from under the gun +1, and then 2 other calls leading to us. Let's say this guy folds, this guy folds, this guy calls the 20. And I should just preface this now because I've actually been doing the hands kind of wrong. They do things in a really weird way in these Texas rooms that I'd never seen before I got here, which is that if you're straddling, which in this hand I have a $5 straddle on the button, if you're straddling, you get to act last. So actually in this hand, I got to act after this guy had already called the 20 and this guy had folded, and then the action would come over to me on the button. So I get to close the action. There's 5 players in for $20. I have the 8-9 offsuit on the button. I'm going to make the call here for $20. So I go ahead and come on in, and the pot is $121 going to the flop. And the flop is 5 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds, and an offsuit deuce. So we flop a gut shot straight draw. Now the read that we're going to have in this hand, I guess it's going to be relevant to this. So let's just start with what happened. There's a check here. This guy bets. Ooh, back to my brush. This guy bets 45, a pretty small bet, and the under the gun +1 player makes it $100. This guy folds, and this guy folds. So it's on us. We have a 45 and a 100. What's relevant in this hand is that Villain 3 and Villain 4 are pretty good friends. They're both regulars, and they're both professional poker players. It's weird because they play like very tight and normal against everyone else, but they try to level each other all the time. Like, it's super common if they're in pots by themselves. They're laughing the whole time, putting in these little raises against each other, trying to make each other think really hard about every pot. And they're just having a good time. They're a couple young guys, and they're always playing leveling games. They've gotten in like 3 and 4 and 5 bet pots pre-flop a lot of times, and they just laugh at each other and go, "Oh, you got me off the 9s," or whatever. But they play a lot of leveling games with each other. So when it gets around to me, I decide to spoil the leveling game party. I think there's a very good chance that Villain 4 does not have 5, 7s, or deuces, which is the hand that I think he's kind of representing here. I mean, he could also have something like a straight and a flush draw. I don't think he would do this legitimately for value with the hands like 8 or 9s. I think he's trying to have a little fun. There's a lot of hands that I think he might do it with, and he's trying to have a little fun with his buddy who might have an overpair and try to get into a little bit of a leveling war. We are like $1,100 effective at this point, so there's a lot of money behind, and they're kind of messing with each other, I think, a little bit. And I think, just generally speaking, this guy's doing this light a little bit too often because of their dynamic with each other. So I decide to try to spoil the party, and I knock it up to $210 on the button with my 8-9. Now we have some equity. We have some things we can represent. So if this guy calls my 210 and the turn peels off a 6, obviously we're looking great. If this guy calls my 210 and the turn peels off a diamond or something like that, we can represent that against either player. Even if Villain 4 calls us, we can represent a diamond on the turn. There's a lot of things that are capable of happening in the future in this hand. Just feels like with us being in position, this is a sweet board for us, especially given their dynamic. Villain 2 folds to my raise, and Villain 3 folds to my raise. Villain 4 tanks for a minute here and calls the 2/10. So now we're kind of oopsie. We got called. I mean, we have some things we can do, like I mentioned before, but we're less excited about this. We didn't really think we were going to get called here. Going to the turn, 586 in the pot. But guess what peels off on the turn, ladies and gentlemen? It's the 6 of spades. So now there's 586 in the pot. The 6 of spades peels off. We make the stone nuts, and Villain 4 checks to us. Now, kind of an interesting spot here because I think the range for Villain 4 includes some straight and flush draws and sets. I mean, maybe something like 5-7. If he just happened to play the 5-7, that's a possibility. I don't think he would have called the 2-10 with a hand like Ace-7 or even like Pocket 8s. I don't think those hands are in the range. So I think what we're dealing with here from this player is diamonds, maybe diamonds with a straight draw, could possibly be a naked straight draw, although 4-6 and 6-8, even with the 5-7, kind of don't feel like they're in this guy's range with the way that this pot is played. It feels more to me like he has a set or he has a flush draw. And the flush draw might include a straight draw as well. He checks to us, 586 in the pot, and we're just over that in our remaining stack. We have something like 700 and something remaining in our stack. When he checks to me, we have some interesting choices. If this guy has a flush draw, he is going to fold to any bet that is not giving him good odds on his flush draw. He's a solid player. He knows what he's doing. So he's going to lay that hand down if we don't make a bet that gives him good odds, which has to be a pretty small bet. If he has a set or if he has two pair in some fashion, he's probably not folding no matter what. So the way that I decide to do it is I decide that I am going to represent the flush draw. I definitely would have made it 2-10 here with a hand that had a flush draw on this board in some spots. And I think if we represent a flush draw here, we're most likely to get called. I don't think he's going to lay down two pair hands. I don't think he's going to lay down a set. If he has the flush draw, I just don't want the value that comes with a flush draw. If I want him to come along with a flush draw, I'm going to have to bet like $200 and something here. And then if the flush misses on the river, I'm just not going to get any more value. And if the flush gets there on the river, then it's an ugly spot because I have to give him the proper odds to call, which we just don't want to do. So I just decided to represent the flush draw myself and hope that he had a couple pairs or a set, and we just jammed the stack in on the turn for 700 and something. I didn't actually write down the exact number, but it was 700 and something. I jammed the turn for 700 and something, and he tanks for just a second there and calls off. He has a set that he was slow playing. The river bricks off, and we take down the full pot. This was one of the bigger pots that we played, and I think I played this hand the way I would like to play it against this villain. If this villain was like yesterday, we played against that guy that I was calling draw guy. If this was draw guy, then I think you're better off just making it like 400 or 500 on this turn. Give him improper odds to call with his flush draw, but he'll call anyway. And you can just, like, a shove might be too much. He might fold to a shove, but maybe he calls like 400 here. You know, something like that. You know, you can do that if this is somebody like draw guy, but against this guy, I just don't think he's ever calling unless he's getting the right odds with one of those draws, and we don't want to give him the right odds. Maybe I could have just made a bet that was like slightly too big for the odds on his hand. He has 9 outs, so he's 18%-ish. With one card to come, maybe we give him odds like, you know, maybe we give him 3-1 and see how he does with that. But in any case, I decided to just shove the turn, representing the flush draw myself, and we get snapped off. So it works out. The river bricks, and we win a pretty big pot here. Let me do the other hand first because I have them in that order. Okay, this hand is a PLO hand for people that have not played much PLO. It's the same as Hold'em, except that you get 4 cards and you must use 2 of the cards from your hand. So, like, if you have, it's going to be particularly relevant in this hand. If you have, for instance, just the naked ace of spades and the board comes 4 spades, you don't have a flush because you have to use 2 of the cards from your hand in your finishing hand. So in this hand we have the king 8 of diamonds with a queen and a 7 that are both offsuit. This is a pretty mediocre to bad starting hand, but I do play a lot of hands in PLO. I actually think if there's a mistake in this hand, it's calling with this hand pre-flop, which I'm going to do. Even though I'm in position, this hand doesn't really make a lot of nut hands, and that's what you're looking for in these kind of games. If you're going to be playing 6 to 7 ways to the flop, you're looking for hands that have the ability to make the nuts. And the king-queen can make the nuts, the 7-8 can make the nuts on perfect boards, the king-high flush can be the nuts if the ace of diamonds is on the board, but this hand doesn't make that many nutted hands. And so even though we're going to be getting like really good odds here, I'm not sure. I think maybe I fold this hand looking back. But let's look at how it played out. So we have the king 8 of diamonds, queen 7 offsuit. There's a player raised to 15. I'm just going to assume it was under the gun because there's a lot of calls. There's 6 total calls, including me. I didn't write down exactly who they were, but 3, 4, me, and let's assume that the button was in there. Okay, so we've got a bunch of players in the pot. 7 players going to the flop, and the flop comes ace of clubs, 4 of clubs, king of clubs, 3 clubs on the flop. Now this is a very interesting spot because we have the queen of clubs, which is required to make the nuts. For people that have played a lot of PLO, this will be automatic for them. They have what's called the blocker. But for people that don't play this game, this is something that happens fairly often in this game that is interesting. So we have a card that is required to make the nuts here. So it's, even though we don't really have anything, I mean we have a pair of kings, but even though we don't really have anything, we know that they don't have the nuts. And PLO is a game where you're mostly playing for the nuts, especially on a board like this. So it just puts us in an interesting spot that we have that. Someone who is not the original raiser bets 50, so there's check, check, and we get a bet to 50. And, oh wait, going to the flop, there was 107 in the pot, if my math is correct. This guy bets 50. We get a fold, and we decide we're going to use our blocker, and we make it 120. The reason for this bet is I often don't, if I'm going to try to bluff here, I often don't like just potting right here. People are more likely to call 1 bet when they're bluff catching than 2 bets. So I'd rather set the story up here and then make my real bluff on the turn, assuming the board doesn't go anywhere. So I make it 120, villain 1 folds, villain 4 folds, villain 5 folds, villain 6 calls 120. So this pot is $347, if my math is correct. Going to the turn, and the turn is the 5 of clubs. This is kind of bad for me because it does set up that there's less other clubs running around in people's hands. I'm not sure that this villain cares about that. I don't think he's like a super strong player, but he's also probably not one of the weakest ones. 347 in the pot. He checks to us again. Now this is where I'm actually set up for here. His stack is about $400 roughly going into the turn. So I've set up my story. We're going to continue with the story, and we pot the turn for $347. It's a decent spot because if he goes all in here, I can actually just fold and save $50 because I'm just straight up drawing dead to everything he can have. There's 2 hands that he can have on this flop that are, like, there's only 2 hands that are possibilities. He can have a flush that's not the nuts because we have the queen, or he can have a set that he's hoping to make a full house with, and he's just hoping to peel off a card and see if the turn fills him up. I mean, technically, I guess he could have like ace king or ace four or king four, but either way, he can have something that's trying to make a full house, or he can have a flush that's not the nuts. Both of those hands don't like this turn card. I mean, the flush to some degree does, because it makes it less likely for me to have one, but neither one of them does this turn card make them feel any better about their hand than the flop, really. And so we just go ahead and continue our story. We pot it for $347. He thinks for a very long time. The club, this kind of helps me just a little bit in fantasy land, because it doesn't help me. For a good player, this card can't help me. But against the mediocre or bad player, it does give another nut hand that they can't beat, which is the 2-3 of clubs. If I have 2-3 of clubs, I now made a straight flush. So there's now two hands that he can't beat if he's sitting here with something like a jack high flush. If he has like a 10 high flush, there's three hands he can't beat. Now, this is where like leveling, or like, you know, your knowledge level in poker matters, because I will never have 2-3 of clubs, and I will never have like a jack high flush, because if I'm re-raising the flop and potting the turn, I wouldn't do that with the jack high flush, and I wouldn't have re-raised the flop with the 2-3 of clubs either. Bad players will just think all of those things are possibilities. So if he has like a 9 high flush here and he's a bad player, he's going to be worried that I might have the 10 high flush or the jack high flush. If he's a really good player, he knows that my hand is either the queen high flush or nothing. Those are the only hands that I could really realistically have here. But yeah, bad villains can be a little bit scared of some things that aren't actually in your range, because I would just never raise to 120 here with a 10 high flush on the flop. In any case, he tanks for a long time and kind of gives me the "if you got it, you got it" speech, and he calls with the jack high flush. So we flush some money down the drain, betting our blockers, and that is exactly why you should not. Well, I mean, it's all right to do it every once in a while, but you shouldn't just make this a standard play against bad players. I would much rather make this play I make in this pot against the two players that were in the previous hand. I think I would get folds from them almost every time. But this is why you don't make these kind of plays that often against bad players. This was a guy that I felt like I could get off of like a 10 high flush here if he had it, but it turns out I was wrong. He gives me the "if you got it, you got it" speech, raises $50 more. I fold, and the whole table has a great laugh when I fold for 50 more, and he shows the jack high flush. That was always what he had, was something in that range. The thing is, I'm drawing dead to like basically anything he can have, so there's just no point in even continuing. Interesting pot, but we flush 500 down the drain in that one. And then we go to a very interesting pot that was a lot of fun to play when the pot was actually playing. This is a bomb pot. So the way bomb pots work, for people that don't play those, and it's, man, are they fucking popular in Texas, and it annoys me because I'm not really a big fan of them. Everyone just puts in a preset amount of money. It happens like either once per round or once per dealer change, depending on what table you're playing. There's a preset amount of money for each table. So at the table I'm playing, it's $15. So everybody puts in $15. Everybody gets dealt a hand, and we go straight to the flop. There's no pre-flop action at all. And there's two boards. So the two different boards will run out, and whoever wins the top board gets half the pot. Whoever wins the bottom board gets half the pot. And the key in these games is you need to either have a mortal lock on one of the boards, like just if you flop a royal flush on one board, you can go nuts. But the real thing is you want to have a hand that has the chance to win both boards, because you want to be scooping the pot. If you can't scoop the pot, then there's a lot of theory involved, because like let's say that I was to flop like the nut flush on this board, but this board I'm just drawing dead. So it comes like 3 diamonds, and then it comes like jack, jack, king. Some board where I'm just super unlikely to win. Now, I'm actually vulnerable, because even though I have the nuts right here, there are ways for me to not have the nuts right here in the future. The board pairs and someone makes a full house, and I have no chance of winning this half of the pot. So even though it looks super strong that we flopped a flush up here, it's actually a pretty vulnerable hand, because it's like best case scenario I'm going to win half back, and there's a decent chance that this board just pairs off or something, and then I am looking rough on both spots. I don't know if I'm beaten up here with a full house, etc. So what you want to do a lot of the time is make bets like, even if the pot's like 500, you just bet like $70, because you want a bunch of people to call. Since you're only getting half the pot, You don't want to just get called by one guy who has the bottom board when you have the top board, and then you guys just take your money back. If you bet like 70 and everybody calls, then a bunch of these people are putting dead money into the pot if you think you're going to win one of the boards. In any case, bomb pots are kind of interesting. And we have the 10-9 offsuit with ace-4 of diamonds. Going to the flop, there is $135 in the pot because this is a bomb pot. And here is our two boards. So you're going to have to keep track of two boards in this one. 3 Jack Queen Rainbow. Once again, I don't know the specific suits on some of these, so if I accidentally make a mistake when it comes to the suits. If I wrote Rainbow, I didn't write the exact suits. So 3 Jack Queen Rainbow. The second board is Queen 7-6 with 2 diamonds. Okay, so let's talk about our hand. On the top board, we do have a way to make the nuts. We have the 10-9, so an 8 can peel off there, and we have the ace-10, so a king could peel off here, and we would make a straight. So we have 2 ways to make nut straights. We also have backdoor diamonds. There's a diamond here, so if it comes diamond, diamond, we can make the nut flush. A lot of ways to make nutted hands on this board, or a couple different ways to make nutted hands on this board, which is a good thing. And then on the bottom, very straightforwardly, we have the nut flush draw. We could also hit an 8 to make the 10-9 good, so we just have lots of ways to make nutted hands on both boards. At least for a bomb pot, this is a lot of ways. We have a decent number of ways to make the nuts on both boards. That's a pretty good spot. What happens in the hand is this player pots it for 135. There is a call of 135, and then it folds to us. Now, we don't actually have anything yet, so we have a couple options. Like, we could repot it here. We have a lot of ways to make good hands. If they fold, it's just awesome for us. We're just going to win $400 for free if we happen to get folds. But this just seems like a spot where we'd like to make a hand on at least one of the boards before we go too nuts. So I just call the 135. It folds around, so there's 3 of us in the pot going to the turns. And the turns are the 8 of spades, hello friend, and the 2 of hearts, so just an offsuit 2. I actually don't think this was double flush draw, so we'll go with 2 of spades. So we improved to the nuts on this board, and down here we still have our flush draw, we still have our gut shot. Good things going on here. This is great. Now we have a made hand it's vulnerable. There's a lot of ways that it becomes the non-nuts on the river, but it is the nuts right now, and we still have great ways to try to win this pot as well. So this is just a sweet spot. And the original bettor bets 400 on the turn. Now I'll tell you, just from reads, this guy's hand felt super likely to be one thing to me. This guy calls 400. One thing you have to watch out for in bomb pots is hands that are good on both boards. So you pay attention to like 2 cards that they can have that play well on both boards. Can you see a hand that plays very well on both of these boards? Because this guy's playing super aggressively. Can you see a hand that plays very well on both boards? Just giving everyone a second. Pocket Queens. Pocket Queens plays pretty well on both boards. He is top set here, top set here. Very, very strong. And this guy is a guy who seemed like a very solid player. He seemed like he knew what he was doing. So it felt like Pocket Queens was very much like a very likely hand for this guy, the way that he was playing. If there was like an 8 also on this bottom board, it would be possible to maybe add something like Queen 8 and made 2 pair on both boards. But even that, I think most people are going to not get too aggressive with 2 pair on both boards in an Omaha bomb pot. But Pocket Queens feels pretty good. It's the nuts down here, and it was the nuts on the flop up here. It's only now beaten by 9-10. It's pretty. I like this guy to have queens a lot. But this guy also calls the 400. Very bizarre. And to my memory, this guy has very little behind. Like maybe like $100. the villain 6. So it gets to us, and what do? We have the nuts on this board. We have ways to scoop the bottom. If we think this guy has queens, he has ways to scoop us on both boards too, but we're favorite here, an underdog down here. What do? I go ahead and make it 1,000 even. And part of the reason that I do this is I'm actually pretty confident this guy has queens. And that means that if I raise here, I get to see what the rivers are and how they mess with his hand and what they do for our hand, and then I get to make a decision on the river because we have some money behind as well. So I like this play. Villain 5 is so frustrated as he calls. He tanks and calls, but he's like really annoyed about it. And this guy calls off his last like $100. So now this guy is all in, and it's just me and Villain 5 going to the river. And the rivers come. Oh, by the way, when this guy calls 1,000, I'm like super confident he has queens. I'm actually not really sure why he didn't just get it in on the turn. I mean, I might have 9-10, but he's nutted here, and his hand versus the draws here is pretty good. I'm pretty confident he has queens, and I'm not really sure why he didn't just get his last bid in here. But in any case, the rivers come a 9 that does not complete any flush draws. And a 5 of diamonds. So we make the nut flush down here. Fantastic. That's what we needed. 9 comes up here. The only way that the 9 really hurts is if he happened to have King 10, which I mean is a possibility. If he had something like, you know, queens isn't the only thing he can have. There's some other weird hands he could have. He can have King 10 with spades and an ace maybe. You know, something like that is definitely a possibility that this 9 got the King 10 straight there. Doesn't feel absurdly likely. I'll be honest, this guy still looks really frustrated at this point when these rivers come out. He looks really annoyed. And I think maybe I let that play into my judgment. I mean, I'm trying to justify exactly how I played the river here. I think the total that he has left is like 1,100 maybe. And I end up just betting kind of small on the river. I bet 600. And really, I don't think there's... I think maybe I was affected by the fact that this guy was looking very frustrated. Was a very nice guy. He seemed really annoyed about what was happening in this hand. And, you know, I think maybe I let that affect me a little bit. Because I think probably, I mean, I should just be potting this river. There's an argument for the smaller bet that I end up making, which is kind of like, if he's really this frustrated about his hand, is he going to call off the whole stack? Maybe not. Maybe he feels a little bit better about being left with 500 behind or something like that, but I think I'm probably just supposed to pot. But I bet 600. He actually tanks for quite a while before calling the 600. And it's not actually as bad as he might be expecting. Villain 6 gets scooped. He doesn't get anything out of the pot. I actually didn't see his hand, but he doesn't get anything. What it turns out this guy has is Queen, Queen, 10. So he had the top set on both boards, but this 9 on the river gives him a chop with us on the top board. He makes the same straight we have. So he gets half of the top board, and we get all the money from the bottom board. So it's called 3/4ing, and we 3/4 him. We get 3/4 of it back. So we would have made a little bit more money, a decent amount more money, if we had done that. I'm a little bit surprised, honestly, that he was acting the way that he was when he had the Queen 10, because like you're probably winning the top board with the Queen 10. And then you still have your set down here just in case I don't have diamonds. I don't know. I wouldn't be as annoyed as he was in that spot. But he gets 3/4, and we win 3/4 of a pretty sizable pot. Interesting hand, though. I might do some more of these just because the theory in these bomb pot hands is so interesting. Sorry about that. The theory in these bomb pot hands can be really interesting, and we do have to play one like every round. So I play a decent number of them throughout the course of the day. In any case, that's all for today, guys. I'm about to go in for day 5 and not too long here. Hopefully anybody that watches this enjoys the breakdown of these hands, and we'll talk about some more tomorrow morning. So I appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you later.